Hi, everyone. Thank you again for rejoining us for this last episode of Race to the Midterms. Max Huskins, you've been with us this whole time. You've been with me. I so appreciate it. What are your closing thoughts as we interview Christy Smith and Senator Alex Padilla?
Well, it's been quite a political and a social journey here with you. We've had incredible, amazing guests, some of the most interesting, influential, and political people here in the United States that are going to be helping us decide the journey that this country will be taking, hopefully with the votes of our viewers and everybody else in this country. And I really hope that everybody makes the right call and the right educated choice when it comes to November 8th for these midterms of 2022.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly why we did this whole series. And we really encourage everyone to vote. As you'll hear Christy say in our upcoming interview, um, trans people who might be concerned about voting, she and her team will provide assistance. There is help out there. Speaking of which, let's get to our interview with Christy Smith. I endorsed her. She's a wonderful person, smart and kind, and they are not mutually exclusive traits, everyone. You can be smart and kind and represent us, as she will. Christy, without further ado, let me just start talking to you about the state of your race. And, frankly, let's start talking about inflation. Why is everybody so concerned about inflation without realizing what this Congress has already done to fight inflation? What's your take on this?
It's certainly a challenge. And in districts like mine, where we've got commuters who have the longest commutes in the state, some even in the country, going from the Antelope Valley, the price of gas when you've got a round trip daily that's an hour and a half, it's tough. It is tough on families' pocketbooks. But, there is a real disconnect between the Republican messaging, which blames President Biden right now for this, when the Democratic House, a slim majority in the Senate, and this president have put the American people front and center of doing everything they can to tackle inflation, from reducing prescription drug costs, capping the price of insulin. Now they're situated and ready to go after gas price gouging, making sure that we got baby formula back on the shelves so that cost wasn't out of control. And we are in this kind of global moment of inflation. But, here at home, it's literally the Democrats who are doing everything that we can to make sure that families can continue to get by. So raising and protecting wages and holding the line on corporate greed is really what's going to get us through to the next phase as globally prices start to come down. And the argument that they're better on the economy just simply doesn't wash. These are the same people. 6 Republican states are the ones suing to stop student loan forgiveness. Those are Republican states doing that. And again, these are the people who have voted time and again against investments in the American people that help American families get through this inflationary moment. So I know that our voters see it in this district. We're having really good conversations at the doors about that. They know that Garcia is simply paying lip service to the issue, but isn't really doing anything about it.
And that would be MAGA Republican Mike Garcia, who you're talking about, who is the current representative, who is a Stop the Steal fan and a Trump fan. And by the way, he didn't show up, if I remember correctly, to the Saugus High School shooting after that occurred. You did. Um, Today is the day when the mass murderer at the Parkland High School got convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Today was also the day that CNN released a tape of a 10-year-old, I think, who was calling from the classroom at Uvalde, saying, please come and help, please come and help. And nobody came for an hour plus. Unfortunately, school shootings are on the ballot as well, or at least they should be. I know that this is something that matters to you, and you just released a video by one of the survivors of Saugus. Could you tell us about your experience with that mass shooting and what you would do if you were elected.
Yeah, well, I want to give credit, first of all, where it's due to Mia Tretta, who is the young woman speaking in that video. She actually, with her parents' help, produced that video herself because her story is so important for her to tell. And she has been an incredible young leader and activist across the country for sensible gun reforms and really speaking out against gun violence in this country. And what she highlights, though, is that, you know, virtually, sadly, there are fewer communities untouched by the pandemic of gun violence across the country. We also see statistically increasingly, those are in red states and red cities where there are very lax and lenient gun laws. And so for me, though, really horrifically on the day of the Saugus shooting here, I was serving in the California state legislature, but I'm a mom in this community. I'm a former school board member in this community. And my first thought was get to where I could be most helpful to the young people and the families who wanted to be reunited, and then figuring out what we could do to aid the victims and their families and help the whole school community recover, which is what we focused on. My opponent, on the other hand, has been standing in lockstep with the NRA, taking tens of thousands of dollars of their money and making sure that, you know, people who shouldn't have them have access to AR-15s and all kinds of weapons that were intended as weapons of war. They weren't intended for use by civilians. And for the next generation, I've told you this when we've talked before, for the next generation, we cannot leave them a country where we're more willing to protect someone's right to have a gun than we are to protect who they love and when they want to have a family. You know, we're so backwards in this moment on which rights and freedoms matter. And it's the ones that are fundamental to people's well-being that should matter more than people's right to cause mass destruction with a gun.
Hi, my name is Mia Tretta. In 2019, I was one of several students shot at Saugus High School. Since then, I've devoted much of my life to preventing gun violence from happening to anyone else. That's why it kind of sucks to know that Mike Garcia represents my community in Congress. Just like he didn't vote to lower gas prices, or for women's reproductive rights, voting rights, the fight against climate change, the Inflation Reduction Act, or to safeguard our democracy. But he did show up to support these guys. Look, in the days after the shooting, I watched from my hospital bed as 15,000 community members gathered to cry, and grieve and pray for the fellow classmates we had lost, including my best friend. If you were one of those 15,000 who stood there or watched from home, wondering what you can do, now's your chance. On November 8th, vote no to Mike Garcia and the NRA, and vote yes for Christy Smith for Congress. Will Christy Smith always vote for gun sense legislation? You bet she will. Somebody has to do what's right for our community. And in Congress, that definitely won't be Mike Garcia. So vote for Christy Smith.
And you're sitting in front of an expanded rainbow flag.
Yeah.
We really feel, and this is why Max, who, by the way, is a millennial ally, he's not a member of my community, but he is so concerned about the midterms and about LGBTQ rights, as obviously I am, that, you know, he's joined me in doing this series. We are at risk. LGBTQ rights are on the ballot, and it's not just rights as in the right to marry, it's the very right to exist. Your opponent, on the other hand, is banning books, you know, and basically either wants to see us converted to straight, which ain't gonna happen, or, you know, just gone and invisible. So how will you stand up for us in Congress if elected.
Yeah, LGBTQ rights are civil rights. And we have a proud, long history in this country of a civil rights movement that was most recently, in the hands of our LGBTQ brothers and sisters who fought very hard for marriage equality and for rights. And so in a moment like this now, to see the gay and trans community in particular being called out, being marginalized by that extremist movement as a means to further drive wedges between communities, to embolden and to empower people with that really extremist agenda is something we have to push back against hard. It is disgrace to our country. It is discrimination against our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. It's a rise of anti-Semitism. It's a rise of misogyny. And so in this election, we all need to be arm in arm in saying we will stand for the hard-fought freedoms and protections of the entire civil rights movement, our brothers and sisters of color. It's incredibly important because the other side is literally using this as a wedge to amass political power. And we've all fought too hard to go back.
Well, and this actually happens to be Transgender Awareness Month, and it will culminate with remembering the trans dead. And there's been an epidemic of trans people who've died. We interviewed Bambi Salcido, who is the founder and CEO of the Trans Latina Coalition as part of this series. And I asked her, even though trans people are so worried about going to vote lest they be humiliated when people question their name change, or maybe identify them in a line to go vote and pull them out of line and beat the crap out of them. There is even more so than gay, lesbian, bisexual, I would suggest, the trans community is really at risk. And saying not just in terms of school sports, but very existence. How would you back the trans community, and not just in November as Trans Awareness Month, but when you get to Congress? Will you be an ally there for our trans brothers and sisters?
Absolutely. And to your point, though, about voting, that one in particular really troubles me. And I want to make sure that every trans voter in California 27 knows you do not need to vote alone. You reach out to our campaign and we will make sure that we have at least one person showing up with you to your polling location, or even if you'd like us to come and retrieve your ballot and drop it off, or go with you to drop that ballot off, someone from Team Christy will be there for you. We don't want you to vote alone. But secondarily, I think it's a really good sign based on the progress that the movement has made over these years that we're finally starting to see real data, real scientifically based data about participation of trans folk in sports and across all arenas of American life, which really demonstrate very clearly that the politically motivated discrimination is completely unwarranted. And we need to keep talking about that. We need to make evidence-based public policy while also protecting individuals' fundamental constitutionally guaranteed rights. So the community can count on me to be a partner and an ally in that, for sure.
Is there anything that you want to say directly to the people, our people, people who haven't voted yet, as your closing argument?
Please don't sit this one out. Please realize that the intent of all of the negative that you are seeing from the extremist movement, from the MAGA Republicans, is intended to suppress your vote. There are a lot of forms of voter suppression, but even in a big state like California, where we've been so defensive and so protective of the franchise and the right to vote, it doesn't mean that the other side isn't trying to get into your head, isn't trying to make you feel dispirited and hopeless about what the future could be. And your vote is your voice. It is your power. It is your biggest lever of power in our system. And so please don't be afraid to use it. If your vote didn't matter, these people wouldn't be spending millions and millions of dollars trying to tell you how to use it or to suppress it overall. So please, please be a voter by November 8th at 8 p.m. We're counting on you. Future generations are counting on you. So please be a voter.
And right now we have Senator Alex Padilla with us, and he is actually going to be our closing argument for why LGBTQ people in particular need to go and vote. You know, how many times have we said through this whole series, democracy is on the ballot. LGBTQ lives and rights are on the ballot. And I want to say here and now that Senator Alex Padilla, we've known him for a long time, and he is a good, strong ally. I know we've had some problems recently with some allies, but this guy, he's on our side. So welcome, Senator Padilla, and thank you so much for coming and talking to us. I referenced the troubles at LA City Council. Could you just take a minute to reflect on that? Because, you know, Mike Bonin was, and you know, Ron Galpin and Mike's husband were not the only ones who were LGBT folks who were impacted by the racist, homophobic, and anti-Semitic comments we heard on that tape that was released.
Yeah, no, look, first of all, appreciate the opportunity to be back at this critical time, you know, so close to yet another consequential election. So much on the ballot, not just candidates, not just propositions here in California, but frankly, the future of the country, the direction, and our very democracy itself, if you want to talk about voting rights and disinformation. But, you know, the adage goes, all politics is local, and that's where we're starting with the heartbreak of what we heard from some city leaders not that long ago. That tape, that audio tape of a private meeting that was disclosed that had some horrific and appalling commentary, some anti-LGBTQ language that we heard, obviously anti-Black language that we heard, even anti-Hispanic coming from the mouths of Latino leaders was on that tape. So, you know, I think for me, it was initial heartbreak because I knew the people in that meeting, considered some of them friends, and never imagined those words coming out of their mouth like that. So, as hard as it was one of the first officials, I believe, that publicly denounced the language and called for resignations. Not to split hairs of who said more, who said less, or, you know, they were all in the room, they all participated, nobody shut it down. And so there have to be consequences. And why did I do that? Not just because of the substance of the language that they were using, but, you know, in the Senate, I'm a member of the Judiciary Committee. And I hear way too often some divisive rhetoric, some conspiracy theories, and hate from some of my colleagues. And if we are to be able to genuinely denounce and hold accountable when extremist Republicans use this language, then we have to call out Democratic friends when they use it too. We have to be consistent in standing up against hate, standing up against discrimination. And to me, that's what it boiled down to.
And thank you for that. And I want to come back to you. You're sitting on the Judiciary Committee in a second, but first, how do you offer us hope? I mean, how can we regain our trust? And especially at this critical moment when we need all hands on deck.
I mean, the contrast couldn't be clearer, I think, between political parties and candidates in the vast majority of races. Who has stood with the LGBTQ plus community, fighting for not just marriage equality, but frankly, equality and rights in all aspects, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in housing, whether it's access to healthcare, you know, spouses benefits, all those sorts of things. And which party hasn't or doesn't and won't? You know, Republicans, to the contrary, are trying to take away your rights, just like they did with at the Supreme Court level in the undoing of the Dobbs decision. You know, whether it's a bathroom bill here, whether it's what's in textbooks over there, conversion therapy, where it's advocated, where it's banned, it's absolutely clear we need Democrats in office, Democrats in the majority, to continue to make progress for the LGBTQ plus community.
You sit on the Judiciary Committee, as you noted. So it's up to you to look at the confirmation of Supreme Court justices as well as other appointments, obviously. And I'm wondering what you think about this notion about expanding the Supreme Court, because I now work at Public Justice, and my executive director, Paul Bland, wrote an op-ed for The Hill calling for the expansion of the Supreme Court to 13 members to reflect the 13 appellate divisions, as well as having term limits. I asked Adam Schiff about this actually, and he concurred. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about expanding the Supreme Court.
Look, I'm more than open to it because, if for no other reason, just the workload. I mean, can you imagine what the workload and the complexity of issues that the Supreme Court of the United States grapples with today compared to, 25, 50 years ago, let alone, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And so I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have there in conjunction with other reforms. Now, I know a lot of my friends on the Democratic side say, well, let's expand the court and let's stack it with more Democrats and have, Democrats outnumber Republicans. I mean, to look at it that simplistically, I think could be dangerous, because who's to say that Republicans, if they're in the majority, don't expand it to 21 and do the same? And then it's just race to who's got the bigger number and who's got the majority. But whether it's a reasonable expansion together with term limits, and I'll tell you what else has to be part of the conversation: ethics reform for Supreme Court justices. It is unconscionable that Justice Thomas is still making decisions as it relates to Donald Trump, as it relates to the 2020 election and the January 6th insurrection, when clearly he's conflicted out. We know that because of his wife, Ginny Thomas's text messages that have been made public by the January 6th committee. The other thing that should offend all of us into action, including registering and voting, is the Supreme Court's recent decision that we refer to it as the Dobbs decision, undoing the 50 years of protection we called Roe v. Wade. And here it is why it's so unconscionable, not just because we're at the precipice of losing reproductive rights in America, but the very argument that this extremist Supreme Court majority used to justify the Dobbs decision can easily be applied to other issues that we have taken for granted. They could undo interracial marriage. They could undo access to contraception. They can easily undo marriage equality. And so, the message today is you got to register, you got to get out there and vote. But soon after the election, Congress will return to what we call the lame duck session, codifying marriage equality in federal law to protect it from another wrong decision by the Supreme Court is at the top of the things to do. But there's a long list there, again, of critical issues consistent with our values that are now at risk because of this extremist Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court, as you know, has just heard oral arguments about affirmative action. California banned affirmative action a while ago, saying, oh, hey, we're all neutral. It's like we, everything should be on merit and not the selection process, which is discriminatory. And I mean, it's crazy, but it's even crazier that people would use California as a end affirmative action argument. What do you think about what's happening with affirmative action?
Yeah, I agree. Look, as a beneficiary of affirmative action, I stand by the policy of opportunity, the policy that has opened doors to so many. California, a part of what makes us great is our strength in diversity, cultural, linguistic, racial, and in so many other ways. And it adds tremendous value to the higher education experience, which is what we're talking about here. So to prohibit university systems, both public and private, from being able to add value to that, to have that as a consideration, not to achieve quotas, but as a consideration in their acceptance policies, their admissions policies, to create a diverse student population, is again another step in the wrong direction by the Supreme Court, potentially, but it's sure looking like that's what they're about to do. And to take California's policy out of context is what it is. Yes, the current policy, Proposition 209. I still remember the campaign back in 1996, I believe it was. Um, Technically factual, but ignores the recent movement to undo Proposition 209. It was on the ballot recently, came close to overturning 209, and I believe the movement is there to attempt it once again. If you were to ask the California legislature, the governor, the UC Board of Regents, the Cal State University of Trustees, what they think about the issue, they wish we could get rid of 209 and again, reinstill that prioritization of diversity in admissions and in forging a student body, and a higher quality, higher education experience.
You mentioned diversity. There's some feeling among, well, primarily white straight men, that gays already have won. So gay people, LGBTQ people ought not to be considered in the framework of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm wondering what you think about that, because as you probably know, State Senator Scott Wiener and Rick Zabur from Equality California pressed really hard to have LGBT people counted in the healthcare statistics around COVID. How many LGBTQ people got sick? How many LGBTQ people died? Gavin Newsom signed that bill, and there's been no enforcement, as there has been little to no enforcement of so many bills that we see passed. We are not considered a demographic, and even now we're still struggling to be considered part of diversity. We span the spectrum, of everything that's considered diverse. So how can we not be considered part of diversity? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, no, look, I couldn't agree more. I think I made reference to this earlier in the interview. As big of a moment that marriage equality was when it was upheld, or at least not overturned by the Supreme Court, we knew that wasn't the finish line. It's great to be able to love who you love and love how you love, but that's just in a romantic relationship, between two individuals. That did nothing to ensure against discrimination in the workplace. That did nothing to ensure against discrimination in housing. We just talked about university admissions, right, in the affirmative action debate or discussion. But I think if we're going to be, responsible in as informed policymaking as you can be, we need those statistics, right? You talked about being able to gather census information. I'll give you a prime example of how that's extremely helpful. Not just COVID, but more recently, monkeypox, right? We knew that it disproportionately impacted certain communities, including the LGBTQ community. So to be able to have that data helps inform public health experts, so we know where to prioritize resources, whether it's vaccines or anything else. And so, yeah, recognition of LGBTQ individuals is one thing. Respect for the diverse community is another, but really integrating that data gathering, that not just at the census, but especially at the census, helps inform policymaking, which is good for everybody.
You're on the ballot twice. So can you explain that, number one, and then number two, why we all should not only vote, but vote for you twice?
Anybody who's watched me work for the last 20 years now at the city level, at the state legislature as Secretary of State, and for more than 21 months now as your United States Senator, knows how committed I am, what my values are, and how hard I will fight for our values. I hope I've earned your support and your vote, not just once, but twice.
Any closing remarks you want to make?
No, just thank you so much. Thank you for the gift of your time and your consideration. Please get out there and vote, because the contrast couldn't be clearer We know that if the Republicans were to regain the majority, the Dobbs decision, the undoing of reproductive rights is just the beginning. Whether it's an agenda that wants to take our country backwards on LGBTQ rights, on immigration and diversity, when it comes to labor protections, environmental protections, or more, if they were to take over, we cannot afford that. And the only way we overcome that is by making sure every eligible person can register and gets out there and votes, because we made a significant amount of progress these last 2 years, despite the COVID-19 pandemic. The passage of the American Rescue Plan, bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, imagine that, reducing the cost of healthcare in America, the confirmation of a record number of diverse federal judges at all levels of the judiciary, including the first Black woman to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. We've done a lot, but there's so much more to do. And with your support, we're going to keep at it. Thank you very much.
As I embark on this journey, I'm honored and humbled. I think about how 2 immigrants from Mexico, a short order cook and a housekeeper who worked hard, struggled, and sacrificed to raise a family, would see their son grow from the Northeast San Fernando Valley to the halls of Congress. I think about my family, my wife Angela, and our 3 boys. They mean everything to me. And I think about the 40 million Californians, too many struggling or devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic, parents struggling to put food on the table, and far too many anxious and uncertain about what the future holds. I raise my right hand, I take my oath, and I commit to working, just like my parents did for me, to make sure every Californian has a fair shot to achieve their American dream.
Thank you, Senator Alex Padilla. It was a pleasure having him on today on the show. And as we've said earlier, we both hope that you make an educated choice and you go out of your way to familiarize yourself with who you're voting for and what matters the most to you. We hope that we have inspired you to both educate yourself, your friends, encourage your other ones in your circles to go out and vote, or even get involved. As some of our guests have previously mentioned, it's not too late to join even on the day before 8 p.m. because there's lots of things to be done and lots of things to help with. Karen, do you have any closing thoughts?
I do, and thank you for that, Max. And again, thank you so much for working with me to produce this series, this special, in order to present the LGBTQ community in particular with as much information and visibility as we really need and demand and deserve. This is our final race to the midterms series. This is the end of the series. However, Max and I are coming back after the midterms to sit down with 2 politicos, and we're gonna just have a knockdown drag out with whoever, whatever, to try to figure out what the hell just happened, whether Democrats won or lost, and we need to deal with MAGA Republicans running our lives. We're going to try to sort that out. So we hope you'll join us again after the midterms. Go to losangelesblade.com. They have been our wonderful partners throughout this whole series. But in the meantime, please, please vote as if your life depends on it, because it does. Thank you so much.